Hey guys, time for some more Community Starcraft 2 tutorials. My name is Magnet, the host of the show, and today we're going to be learning about some ZvZ strategy. And yeah, I want to just start out by saying welcome to the knife fight, as a lot of people like to call it. ZvZ is a very interesting, kind of straight up bullying type of matchup. It's pretty weird, and a lot of people have a hard time with it just because it's hard to understand all the different little things that go into it. We're going to approach this mostly from a strategy standpoint. I will touch a little bit on micro, such as in Ling Bane fights. But for the most part, I want to talk about the types of games that are happening right now and that have been happening for a long time at the highest levels. And most of the time, they're just going to break down into Roach versus Roach. And a lot of times, people are going to see that and be like, well, this is a boring game. I don't understand it. There's nothing going on. But I'm going to show you the way. So let's jump into the game, and we'll get going here. So as we can see by the name cards, these are two barcodes, meaning that I have no idea who these players are. They could be anybody, but nevertheless, they are Grandmaster level players, so we know that they're at least good. So I would do formal introductions here of these players, but it'd just be barcode versus barcode anyway. So we're just going to jump into the game and get to a point where we can start talking about some stuff. Now the first thing you want to decide is, how am I going to open? And if you've watched our openers video for ZvZ, which should be preceding this by 3 or 4 in the playlist, you'll notice that there are a lot of openers. If you go just straight up hatch first, this is an outright risk. I would really not recommend that if you're trying to learn how to play ZvZ. Straight up hatch first is really hard to do, and it dies to a lot of cheesy plays, and if you play on ladder, you're going to see a lot of really cheesy stuff. So the red Zerg is opting for a hatch first, and honestly, it just doesn't... For me personally, it offers too much risk and not enough reward. So honestly, I would just stay away from it if you're learning how to play this matchup. On the other side, the blue player, the blue barcode, I don't know whatever else to call him, went for a 14 pool and then took a hatchery later on. You'll notice that these first two overlords for these players are both being sent out. And the reasoning for that is that in ZvZ, there's not a lot of stuff that comes out to kill your overlords for quite a long time. So you want to have an overlord somewhere over here. This overlord's coming in here to check the gas. You can see that they're both doing that, and you'll notice that neither one of them has taken gas yet. So the short answer here, and I'm sure we'll touch on it again later, is that spread your overlords out, because it's going to give you map information for a long time until queens or hydras or mutas or whatever start getting adventurous out on the map. Just keep these somewhere that you can scout. Keep them near the natural so you can see if they're walling off or what kind of buildings they have. Stuff like that. And then you're typically going to draw a line with overlords down to your opponent's base so that you have full vision of where their army is at all times. So regarding gas timings, neither of these guys have taken gas yet. We can see that. There's really two schools of thought here. One, you can go for an earlier gas, get a pool, get a Baneling Nest, and try to get into Ling Bane micro wars. Or you can just skip it and play a more defensive style. Skip your gas for a little while. I would just say do whatever you're most comfortable with. What we're going to see from both of these players is they will start dropping creep tumors out here. You can see this queen's getting ready to do so, or maybe she is, whatever. What they're going to do is they're going to kind of limit the entry space for their naturals here, so that they can be preventing things like speedling all-ins, things like Ling Bane, stuff like that. And they're both getting their gases now at a pretty late time, but they do go double gas. And the whole idea for this is obviously just to get into their next stage of tech. You will want to take them eventually, but both of them just trying to push out as many drones as possible. And of course, if your overlord is somewhere within range, you can kind of scout what's going on. And also both of them taking a third base. So this is a really passive ZvZ, and I want to start off passive. And now we start to see these guys walling off their natural a little bit to prevent run-bys, prevent Ling Bane stuff. But both of them taking a third base. And the most important thing is that both players know that each other took a third base. Because this overlord was here, it saw that. This blue overlord was at the red point, so he saw that as well. So they both know. And this is kind of a weird part of ZvZ in the sense that if you take a third base, you should be expecting you to get attacked, almost no matter what. A big deal in ZvZ is that if you can cancel your opponent's third base and you can keep your own, that's basically game over. That'll end a lot of ZvZs, especially when it's a better player versus a not as good player. So regardless, if you take a third base, or even if you don't take a third base, there's a stage in the game where the first person to take a third base should trigger some links to be produced. We see blue going for that first. His objective is going to try and get this down as fast as possible. So you can take it from two schools of thought. One, either you try and defend your own third base and you take one faster, or you just attack somebody that takes a third base and take one behind it as well, so that either you're going to be fighting on their side of the map or you're going to be fighting on your side of the map. Obviously the defender should have the advantage, but either way, like I was saying, if one player gets a third base down and finished and the other player loses theirs, that's game over. So you're going to see that quite a bit. Let's go ahead and start this back up again. So Zerglings making their way out here. You can see the blue player is now starting to make that little bit of a choke. This is a little unusual. You don't typically see double upgrades in ZvZ, and you'll notice that you might be looking at this and saying, why is he getting ranged upgrades? And that's because basically every ZvZ nowadays is going to break down into Roach versus Roach, and typically the player with the better upgrades is going to win these Roach versus Roach fights. It seems obvious, but this is way more important in ZvZ than any other matchup right now, is having an upgrade advantage. You can get away with it a little bit in TVT, you can get away with it in PvP, having a differential in upgrades, but it is enormous in Roach versus Roach because the battles last so long, there's so many reinforcements, and the Roaches are a fairly limited unit in the sense that they can only fire so far. So if every one of your Roaches is hitting every one of their Roaches and you have an upgrade advantage, it's going to be a huge difference. So, both of them taking extra gases here. We should see a Roach Horn coming down. Yep, there we go. There's a Roach Horn for blue anyway. And both these guys are going double upgrades, which, like I talked about, was not something you typically see. And here's those fights over here at the third base. We're going to see the blue player's the one being aggressive because he made links first. He's going to try and cancel this so we can watch this a little bit. Really smart positioning on the queens to get in between the minerals and the gas. You can see them dropping transfuses on each other to try to keep them alive as long as possible. And at this point, if red holds this, and blue invested this much into trying to kill that, he'll be in great shape. So let's take a look at the worker counts. 46 to 41, and making drones in ZvZ is obviously going to be a huge deal. You can't over-drone, as you may know, and you can't just be too safe. You need to play this as close as possible, like you're kind of riding a tightrope the whole game. And we can see red trying to get in here and get the unit count. This whole deal with these little Zerglings was just to see if there were more Zerglings being produced. Because then he knows, okay, well, can I drone here or can't I? And that's going to be what determines how you're spending your larva throughout the game. Do little pokes in with handfuls of Zerglings like this and see if they're making more units than you are. Remember to keep your overlords somewhere near so that if you don't catch it and they start to move out, you can start spending your larva on units right away. But it's kind of a tightrope walk, trying to get as many drones out as possible while not dying because you made too many. Seems kind of weird. The only way to get used to that is just to play ZvZ and get used to, and I guess get used to it for one, get used to all the timings, and for two, watch your replays and see where you could squeeze in drones here and there, so that maybe next time you can be a little more prepared with the information that you have. And this may all sound a little bit overly generic, but ZvZ is a very straight-up match like I was talking about. And here's something pretty cute here from Red, just trying to get some drone kills over here, being annoying while the rest of his forces are kind of engaging here and there in the middle of the map. And you can see that just because he was able to keep up a little better, and all of a sudden blue Zerglings are split. He's having a kind of a hard time over here, losing a handful of drones. Look at the drone count now, 52 to 39 in favor of Red. And he was able to get the drones out. You can see it obviously just equaled up. But he was able to get the drones out because he was able to keep his opponent on the back foot just a little bit, make him produce any extra units, and picked off some drones over here. Now this is going to get a little weird because there's an attack here from red on the third, and another one coming in here for blue on the third as well. Now, I would normally say whoever kills the third base here is going to win. But that also depends on how good of trades both of these guys get. So right now, we can see that Red's doing a lot of damage to these drones. He actually has to make the drones turn around and fight to deal with this. And at the same time, Red's going to lose this base. So like I was talking about before, if one player loses the third and the other one doesn't, that's usually game over. But in this case, it's actually not because he's able to kill so many drones. Now it's 36 workers to 45. 36 workers spread across 3 bases isn't any better than 45 spread across 2 because he can still fill up both these bases with 45 adequately. 36 doesn't even fill up 2 and you have 3 hatcheries. So this is a kind of an exception to that, but I would generally say the rule is that if you lose your third base and your opponent doesn't, then you're pretty much dead. This was just a weird circumstance, so there are obviously cases that break the rules. Now we're starting to get into this Roach versus Roach stuff, and you can see that the upgrades for Red are just barely ahead right now. Both of them, however, also started their lair, and that's something we kind of skipped over because we're talking about third base stuff and whatnot, but I would say after your first 2 set of upgrades, your next set of gas should be on your lair. And that's obviously to get things like roach speed, get 2-2 started as well, which we can see is on the way for this red player, who's actually up here. But yeah, the next 100 gas after your 2 first upgrades, if you decide to go double, should be on your lair. There's not much of a reason to wait unless you're playing with banelings. So I guess I should amend myself and say that if you're not spending gas on banelings, your next 100 gas should be on your lair so you can get your roach speed as soon as possible. And if you ever get a fight where it's like roach speed versus not roach speed, the roach speed user has a huge advantage because they can determine every fight. They're going to have their roaches react faster during the battles as far as getting repositioned and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty important stuff. You're not going to see a lot of discrepancies along the times in the high level games. You can see that the research time is almost identical between these two. But yeah, so now you know the lair timings. Just grab it as soon as you're not making banelings and you have your first 2 set of upgrades on the way, or even just your first if you decide to go single evolution chamber, which you'll see in more ZvZs than not. So the third base dies, but like we were looking at before, the worker counts are basically even, only because he was able to kill so many workers over here. Red's actually killed 20 workers, while Blue's only killed 7, so kind of an even trade right there. You can kind of think of this hatchery being dead anyway, because it's really not even operational whatsoever. For quite a long time, and by the time it's actually mining to a decent point, Red's hatchery is going to be done. So now this is the next thing I want to press here. Being crisp on your upgrade timings is a huge deal in this matchup if it's roach versus roach, because what we're going to see is once this player hits 2-2, they're going to have basically an equal amount of roaches, but the 2-2 upgrades are going to be enormous, while the other player is really only on 1-1. We'll talk a little bit more about the battle specifics once it gets to that point, because there's really not a whole lot going on here. Both players just kind of adding on roaches and droning up just a handful. You can see just a few coming out at a time for both these players every once in a while, once they kind of realize that they're safe. But yeah, so we'll just kind of fast forward up to that point so we can get into a little more of a point that I want to demonstrate. Another thing you need to look out for, around this 12-minute mark or so is when things like burrow and burrow of movement can come down, and that's obviously on the roaches. But if you don't catch that and you lose a lot of drones just to a few roaches, or if you split your roaches off incorrectly to deal with being harassed like that, then you're going to take a lot of losses. So this might be a good time, around 12 or 13 minutes, is to morph an overseer, put it like right here, and then morph a second overseer and kind of keep it on top of his army for a while. Just to be sure that you're not getting multi-pronged by burrow roaches or something, because I see a lot of games end just because somebody's being careless about their detection. So about this time, morph a couple of overseers just to make sure you don't die to anything silly like that. Now we see 2-2's done for this roach player, or rather for this red player. They're both playing roach, but for the red player, 2-2 is done, and the 2-2 is not quite done for the blue player. You need to really keep your eye on these, because if you ever get a point where, especially if you have the overseer over top of his army, you can always click on him and see his upgrades. And if you ever see that, especially if you're at a set advantage like this, 2-2 to 1-1, you have to go fight. This is a point in the game where you have to be looking for your advantages. So if you ever have an upgrade advantage, you have to just go. You can't wait. And this red player should realize this in just a second. So we'll start playing the game once again, and I know he does something. Okay, yeah, he starts to move out. The only way you could really lose this fight if you're red is if you walked into a concave. And what I mean by that, and by the way, something really intelligent here, he's mixed in, red has mixed in changelings into blue's army, so he can see this army the entire time. And this is something cool you can do with these overseers that you should have morphed anyway, is just make a couple of changelings and send them up into his army. Even, I mean, this is Grandmaster level players, and he's missing these changelings right now just because the changelings are about as fast as the roaches on creep. So the changelings know everything. He can see it's 1-1. But the only way this red player could really lose this fight is if he attacks into a concave. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's notice the blue player's army positioning right now. He has really good surface area up here. He has all this space. I'll draw a little bit of a line right here with my mouse. So he has all this space right here that he could set his roaches in. And if the opponent was all clumped up like this, then there'd be a bunch of roaches in the back for red that wouldn't be firing. And that would be basically the only way that blue would win this fight, being down a set of upgrades. So what red has to do now, he knows, of course he knows exactly where the army is and what it's doing. You can't usually try and just bully your way in there regardless of upgrades. You have to find creative ways to get them out of position. So a lot of people will use burrow and try to burrow around them. But this is a cool little tactic that he does here. Notice that he moves to the left, trying to make the opponent's army move. And of course the opponent can see everything that's going on down here because he has creep tumors. And as soon as he starts to move over to the side, Red has all this information. He just walks right back up here, and he's going to take this whole area and spread out his roaches right there so that he can get equal surface area to his opponent. So that's what we're going to see. Roaches kind of waddling up here, and there we go. Now all of a sudden it's gone from this much surface area versus all this surface area to basically equal surface areas and a superior upgrades for Red. Now typically this won't end the game. This will do damage to the point where you'll get a good trade, but if you're Red or if you're in this kind of position, you need to know when to back off. So we're going to see a fight here, and it's really hard to tell what's going on right now. There's basically just roaches shooting each other, and you can kind of watch the supplies to see what's going on as well. Now the upgrades start to come into effect because all these roaches have fired about 5 or 6 times each, and those 5 or 6 times means 5 or 6 extra damage on a roach, and it's taking 5 or 6 less damage for every shot it receives. So the upgrades really start to shine through. Red's going to stay in here for as long as possible, and the defending roach player is going to start getting a little bit of reinforcements here. So these roaches are about to hatch. There should be a couple down here as well, and then once he's come up, it's going to take too long for Red to get his stuff across the map. So he's going to have to find a point where you can just disengage, accept that he got a good trade, and then just fight again later when he has all of his roaches rallied together. So the point should be coming up fairly soon. You can see he's still winning this fight, but as the other roaches start to rally in, which we should see in a sec, yeah, here they come, he'll be able to just start disengaging and be a little more wise about taking this on. And of course, if you have roach speed, this is one of the important things, you can disengage. If he didn't have roach speed, all these roaches would be dead, and he would have given away the only advantage that he had so far. Behind this as well, Red has a 4th base coming up. We can see Blue moving over to take his right now, and there we go. Now you can see Red is going to start doing some burrow roach stuff, so he does have burrow on the way. He has an infestation pit coming up as well, which is something you need to think about. You can stay on roach versus roach for a long time, but if somebody transitions into something like hydras or infestors and does it well, that'll be a huge advantage for them. I think this is more of just a safety tech because Red's up by 40 supply right now, just because he got that one trade. So I'm just going to skip ahead to when the infestors come out. Now notice that both these guys are fighting for surface area right now, and note that if you don't have enough surface area, there's going to be a lot of roaches kind of running around back here not doing anything, and that's what's really bad. So yeah, just surface area on roaches and upgrade leads are the biggest things that you're ever going to see in ZvZ, so just keep an eye on that. But see reinforcements come up, and Red has to disengage once again. He just accepts his lead. You'll see that the blue player has lost about 1,000 more resources, which is actually a pretty big deal considering that Red was ahead in economy for quite a while this game. And now he's starting to peel off different roaches and trying to hurt the economy of Blue as well. The income is 58 to 49 in favor of Red. So we can see that the next stage for him is just to kind of either get a good fight, cute little barfing on the hatchery here, contamination, that's what it's called. I always get that and corruption mixed up because they're both C words and they both come from Zerg units. But anyway, so pathogen glands is on the way here. And of course, time out your pathogen glands to start at least decently before you start your infestors. You can see that the research time is about 30 seconds difference, so when it's about halfway done you can start your infestors and they'll get the benefit of that upgrade. But yeah, so from this point there's really not a whole lot to say. Red really just pushes his advantages, and I want to talk about the infestors once they start to become relevant in these fights once again, and then we'll move on to the next replay so you guys can get some more information. But let's say you're in a position where it's an equal game and you need your infestors to do something here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the battle micro once the infestors start to come out, and you can see the roaches still being annoying every once in a while. These drones being Red, being hurt by some roaches that had been run by Red. But so here we go once again. I almost pressed the wrong button. But up comes a hive now, and that's not really going to be relevant because this game's almost over. You don't typically see games get into hives, so I don't even know if I'm going to cover that in this video, but maybe we'll talk about hive Zerg in a different one. But what you want to do with these infestors is find juicy packs of roaches that you can hit. So if you hit like right here, you're going to hit all these roaches, you're going to stick them into place. You can back off and disengage from over here for just a little bit and focus on the weaker part of the army if you're Red. But the positioning here is fantastic for Red, and the roaches are clumping up pretty much ideally. Now I would say you need to do one of two things with your fungals in here. You need to find positions where you could gain a huge advantage by effectively walling him out by using fungal. So, geez, what is the deal with this? It's so annoying. Anyway, uh, if you can land a fungal like right here before all the roaches have come through, then you've basically segmented all this army away from the fight and you can kill this little pack of roaches. Or secondarily, just keep landing fungals on the same spot of roaches so they all kind of die at the same time. If you spread your fungals out and you don't kill a bunch of roaches right off the bat, then it's not really going to do its job. You want the infestors to remove damage from the fight, first and foremost. So we'll see how he drops his fungals and just try to find the biggest pack possible and aim for the middle of it. You can see, there you go, you get a whole bunch of roaches like that. And you can actually see him just disengage just a little bit from this fight. So these roaches, especially in the back, are not participating. So if he moves back just a tad, all these roaches are just sitting here taking damage, and that's exactly what you want these infestors to do. So that, at least by the time they start fighting, they're going to die in just a couple of shots, rather than be full health. So, the infestors aren't really meant to kill a lot, they're just meant to weaken and kind of control the tempo of the battle. You can see Red just stomping him down now, so this is going to basically end this game. We'll just pretend he said GG. So, the next thing I'm going to show you guys is actually a little bit of a conflict of openers. And we'll see how you're supposed to play these kinds of situations out if you get into something like this. This is going to be Prebz versus another barcode. I don't know if this is the same barcode from a previous game or not, but yeah. So what we're going to see here out of the red player is something very different than what we saw before. He's opening with a 10 pool. So he opened with a really fast pool. He's going to try to get in there and do some damage with the Zerglings. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. If you were the blue player here and you just went hatchery first, you could probably take a decent amount of damage from this. But what he's actually going to do is not go hatch first. He's going to take a pool on 15, which is a little bit greedier than usual. And yeah, I was just going to say, I swear he makes it, but I was just not looking at the right spot. Now notice the timing here. The timing on the pool is now done on a 9 pool, or rather on a 10 pool. Zerglings are on the way, and I guarantee you that even though the pool was a lot later for blue, it's still early enough to the point where his Zerglings will be done by the time red Zerglings get there. So this is why you go pool first. It's to shut down silly builds like this. Because if this guy was going 10 pool, especially if he took a gas against hatch first, he would have a huge advantage. This is the one thing I don't like out of this red player. If you're going to open 10 pool, at least open it up with a gas. And usually you're going to go into 10 pool Zergling speed or Baneling all in, something like that. Don't do something kind of middle of the road and silly like this. That's pretty much all I got to say, but I'm going to demonstrate that point where the Zerglings come out here from red. By the time they get there, you're saying, oh man, the pool for blue isn't even done yet, this is so bad. But there's still travel time, and that's what makes this game interesting, is that things don't just happen right away, you gotta wait. But up come the Zerglings here, and look at the progress bar on the Zerglings for blue, and the Zerglings for red are in, and bam, the Zerglings are done. So this is exactly why you want to open up with this 14 pool. You can even take a gas right afterward as well if you want to be ultra safe. But I would say just this gasless 14 pool into hatchery and taking a gas a little bit later is one of the most safe and universal builds. So if you're having a hard time in the openers of ZvZ, do this build. Now if you're blue, let's pretend this was an earlier pool, and there's these Zerglings in here and you need to buy a little bit of time for yours to finish up. You need to bring your drones back and forth between these mineral lines, kind of cluster them up over here, and then wait for the Zerglings to commit in, and if you can ever surround them with your drones, then they'll deal a lot of damage to the Zerglings and at least buy some time. Just try to mitigate drone losses as much as you can. You can see red being a little bit annoying, trying to split off a couple of them to deal with that. And in this circumstance, I think blue's actually overreacting just a little bit, pulling these drones to these Zerglings. Now, one thing here that may be kind of an advantage for the red player is that the meta kind of dictates that if you see Zerglings this early, he may know the timing is probably 10 pull, Baneling, Zergling speed, stuff like that. So he's trying to scout in here for a gas, and he's going to believe it, and eventually he's going to cancel his hatchery, which is unfortunate for him, but ultimately probably the right decision. So Zerglings start coming up here. He could easily push this away with his reinforcements, but he just decides to cancel instead. So down that goes. And he was also making a spine here that he canceled as well. I'm not really sure that that was all too necessary, but you can't be too careful in ZvZ. You don't know what's coming up, and especially if you think it's some type of crazy Baneling all-in, you need to find tools to deal with that, and spine crawlers are obviously a very good tool for it. So now let's take a look at the situations. Both players have started a hatchery. You can see that they both know about this as well, or at least red should. I'm not sure why he pulled his overlord away. That's got to be a misclick or something. But the Overlord positioning for both these guys is good. And notice that even if I just hold my button on blue, you can see that he'll see Zerglings leaving the base, he'll see Zerglings running across the map, he'll see Zerglings about to his base if he had another Overlord right here. That's exactly what I want to do with this Overlord setup, and because he had those Overlords like that, he saw these attacks way in advance, he knew what to do about them. I still don't totally agree with him canceling the hatchery there, but I have to say that with the information that he had, it's the safest choice possible and ultimately won't hurt him in this game. Okay, so now we're seeing something a little different here. Baneling Nest coming up here for blue. And since red opened up with that later gas, you'll notice that he doesn't even have Zergling speed started because he just doesn't have the gas for it yet. So I think red realizes that now he just needs to power drone as hard as he can. He needs to try to deal with whatever attacks can come down right now, so he makes a spine, he walks it down. If there's ever a point where you need to just drone really hard, especially on two bases, use a spine crawler, try to build some buildings in ways that will give you an advantage. Use your queens in creative positions, such as blocking off your ramp to prevent run-bys, or positioning them between buildings down here at the natural. There's a lot of cool ways you can position your buildings and your queens and stuff like that to prevent taking damage from these type of baneling plays. But let's just watch this play out, and I'll explain the baneling wars as they come up, which can be really irritating. So here we go. Blue is morphing these banelings out here. We can see him morphing as many for as much gas as he have. Look at his resources, 8 and 5. That's like perfect. But the Overlord sees this, of course, so red knows everything that's going on. He's getting his spine burrowed here. What you'd almost like to see is another queen down here at the natural. Him only having one is actually a big problem right now because he can't control space very well with that. And he actually has the resources for it too. So I guess long story short, if you're trying to defend from any sort of speed Zergling or baneling attack, you need at least one spine and a decent number of queens that you can move around, transfuse, get in good positions, at least tank some damage for a little while. But I'll just slow this down a little bit so we can see everything that's going on. So first and foremost, the biggest deal out of all of this, I think, is that both of them are going to have a baneling nest by the time these guys start to fight. Sort of. I mean, these banelings are going to be done, but at least the baneling nest will be on the way, and if he can buy some time with this spine and with this queen and with good Zergling micro, then he'll be okay. But the biggest deal is that speed is going to be done for blue, and speed is not even started for red. So you can see that because he decided to go with that kind of ho-hum 10 pool no gas opener, all of a sudden he's starting to pay for it now because he has no speed, his baneling nest is way late, so this is why I really discourage you from running these kinds of openers. So a lot of Zerglings kind of congregating down here, Spine's in a decent position, and mostly for these Zerglings you need to play defensively because if you let these Speedlings get around you and go into your main, you're going to have a hell of a time cleaning that up, especially if you take damage from these baneling hits here. For any baneling fights, I'm going to slow it down to a lot slower speed than the game actually takes place so we can see everything that's going on. So what you want to do if you're the red player, if you see banelings come up here like this, use your spine. You can see he actually has his spine selected, and target down banelings with it, and just only split off 1 or 2 lings and try to pick off the banelings as effectively as possible. Because if any one of these banelings hit like 5 or 10 Zerglings, then that's game over. So we're going to see red try and control his way out of this. You can see he's trying to pull away from there. Good baneling hit right there. Another good baneling hit right there. And guess what? Now red is pretty much dead. Because he did not micro well, and the banelings did all the kind of damage that they wanted to. No speed, no banelingness. You can see that his choice of opener really backfired. And what I really want to highlight even more is just that the opener from blue, it seems a little more overly safe to kind of go for the pool first and the gas shortly afterward to try and get Zergling speed, but it opens up a lot of opportunity with attacks like this. And this game goes on for quite a while longer, another 7 minutes, but you know what, this game is over. Like, there's no way red is ever going to come back being down a hatch, behind in tech, no Zergling speed, and there's no big baneling detonation, unfortunately. Yes, I did screen these replays just to make sure that they were relevant to what we were talking about. So one other thing I want to talk about is the baneling versus baneling micro, because that's one other thing that can come up as well. You obviously want one of your banelings to hit as many of theirs as possible. Then you can usually donate 1 or 2 Zerglings to pick off the rest of the health here. So keep your banelings spread out like blue has right here so that they get as good of detonations as possible without wasting their damage and without one of the other opponent's banelings blowing up your own. So I guess the whole idea here is that split your own banelings against their banelings, and with your Zerglings try to pick off banelings with just 1 or 2 Zerglings at a time assigned to a baneling. And that's it seems fairly simple when I'm describing it, but executing it is ridiculously hard, and that's what makes top Zergs and ZvZs. Their bailing and lean control in these types of fights are just unreal. So the last thing I'm going to take a look at is a replay where both players kind of choose a differing tech route, and we're going to kind of talk about the intricacies in that, in the sense that I was talking about before. Almost every ZvZ boils down to Roach versus Roach, but there is another option, and that other option is Spire. Mutas can be good. It depends on how you're able to control the game. It can open you up to a lot of different things here, so I would say right now it's kind of the de facto alternative style to ZvZ in the late game. The much more standard, and for a reason, is the Roach play. But Muta builds are possible, so let's see how these guys open. You can see the one drone being selected here from the red player. I'm pretty sure that's for a pool, and you actually just choose a different one, never mind. So it's pool first versus hatch first, and once again the blue player is going for a little bit of a risk, but this is a different scenario though, because he's opening up with a hatchery on a 4-player map. So the chances of red scouting him right away, he'd have to send out a drone to get that information and actually be going with like a 6 or a 10 pool or something like that. They're pretty low, so this is a better bet just to go hatch first on a 4-player map like this, especially a huge one like Frost. So I guess that's the one situation I would be okay with saying it's okay to hatch first. But even still, if somebody happens to be running a really gimmicky kind of early pool build, you'll still die like you would on any other map. So that's not ideal. Now this red player is going for an overly safe gas right after pool type of build. This is as safe as you can get. And I'm going to demonstrate to you that even though this is what he does versus a hatch first, you would say, oh man, hatch first is way ahead because he's going to have more drones. He's going to be able to get his economy going on 2 bases a lot faster. But you know, ultimately, it just doesn't make that big of a difference. So, I mean, it's obviously in the player's hands to make that decision for us. By the way, the players are Railgun and another barcode. And he does make a mistake of assigning too many drones here. But the difference here is that since he opened hatch first, he's not going to have his Zergling speed for a really long time, and that gives red a lot of options as far as timings. He can get some good scouting in there by just running a couple of Zerglings in there to see what's going on. Overall, this build is just a lot more flexible than the hatch first build. So again, I just have to stray away from the idea of going hatch first in ZvZ. It's just so linear, it's so rigid, and it dies to so many stupid things that there's not much of a reason to do it. But either way, some people like it, some people are able to handle it, and let's just assume that you are going for a more economic opener. This blind spore crawler is just fine. Since you know there's a risk of you being attacked and not being able to hold it, you can do stuff like this, and you'll see some Zergs do this. They'll just make a blind spine crawler, they'll wall off their front as soon as they possibly can to prevent any sort of silly attacks killing them, and they'll kind of just play it out from there. Now we're going to see that case once again where the third base is basically going to determine who's going to get an advantage throughout this game. Even red being overly safe and taking a spine crawler of his own. But now he has some Zerglings up here and he can see what's going on. If you see some Lings up here and just this blind spine crawler, a couple of queens ready to go, you got to be thinking, okay, well, this has got to mean he's being super greedy. Nobody would make a spine crawler and position their queens forward like this if they were being really aggressive. That doesn't make any sense. So try to kind of glean whatever information you can, make assumptions, and play that way. So both these players kind of gearing up here, and you can see red actually canceled the spine, realizing that the blue player is being enormously defensive. And look at this, actually a full wall. 2 Evo chambers and a Roach Warren. You really want to cancel this so that you don't get walled in, and that's actually what's going to happen. So that's kind of weird. Unless he just cancels the Roach Warren. And no, I guess he doesn't. So he's going to have to break out of his own wall just to go out and expand. And you can see this is where the detriment is starting to happen here. Red, seeing all these buildings finish, can just say, alright, whatever, I can just go ahead and take a third base, and there's not much you can do about it because you're going to have to break down your own buildings in order to get out. And that's kind of a waste of you to waste your time and sit there hitting your own buildings. And I can see all this if I have my Zerglings positioned up here, so that I even have a longer timer to say that if I see this evolution chamber being killed, I know that there's an attack on the way and I'll have plenty of time to prepare for it. So this is another reason why I really don't like these hatchery first openers. So lair coming up for both these guys. You can see that was a lot faster for red because he has a lot more information. Blue is still pretty blind. He has really no idea what's going on because he's opted to be so greedy. And guess what? His greed's not even paying off. It's a 2 drone lean for red, even though he's taken all the safety precautions throughout this game. So now the evolution chamber being killed, and here comes the third base attempts for both these players. You can see red is actually moving down right now, and part of the reason that blue opened up that wall is to send a drone out to try and get this going. So, like we were talking about before, you know third base is on the way, just make Zerglings. The fight is going to happen somewhere, and if it's not happening on your side of the map, you need to go make it happen on their side of the map, because if you can get your third up and theirs gets killed, especially with really equal drone counts, and if you don't take any worker losses like we saw in the first game, then you're way, way ahead. And here comes the tech down now. There's the Spire, and this is going to be the Muta player is, well, I'm totally derping this out, but the red player is going to be the one that opts to do Mutas. He's going to have to know how to handle this from the time being. Baneling Nest is always a good idea just to help out against any Zergling run-bys. Maybe you can help out against things like Hydras if they decide to respond that way. But let's just watch these Zergling fights commence and show what a big deal it is to gain an advantage in that third base fight. So a lot of Zerglings being made for both these players, and that may seem so funny to you guys that they both took an expansion and they're making nothing but units, but that's just how it goes. There's really not much of a reason not to, because if your opponent ever skimps at this point in the game and they lose their very vulnerable base, let me explain why this is so vulnerable. There's no creep being connected right here. The queens are never going to get down there, so it's really just unit versus unit. And at this stage of the game, if you have a lot more units than your opponent, they're going to lose this base because they can't rely on their queens or spines or anything like that to try and protect it. So that's why it's so vulnerable, and that's why you'll see so many attempts on this. So here we go. A little bit of a Zergling fight here. You never want to overcommit and lose your Zerglings because that just ends the attack. Especially for red. For red, you're waiting for a Baneling Nest to finish, and if you can ever get a couple of Banelings mixed into this, it's going to make a big difference. So don't overcommit too hard if you're red. You'll notice when you start winning these fights based upon the shapes of the fights. So like if you're on a concave, like if you're kind of in a half semicircle like this with your Zerglings and they're on the inside, that you can basically equate that to you winning the fight. So here we go. Red now has his Baneling Nest done. Notice where he's positioning them as well. You need to start being creative about your positionings. So the Banelings are morphing behind this grass. So that what red wants to do is try and bait the Zerglings of blue over to this grass to where he doesn't have vision, use the Banelings to blow up his Zerglings and just gain a huge advantage. So here we go. He's baiting them back, trying to not give blue any vision of what's going on here. Blue may have been able to see those, maybe not. But either way, the baiting is on here. And here we go, pulls it back into it, and I think we all know what's about to happen here. Bam! Huge Zergling hit right there, takes a huge lead. And the Zergling is still kind of just derping out here. All of a sudden there's a ton of Banelings on the way. And this is hard. If you don't have your Baneling Nest of your own, you need to be relying on roaches to push this away. But if your roaches aren't out fast enough, like we're seeing out of this blue player, all of a sudden your third base is really exposed, especially if you take Baneling hits like this. There's another big Baneling hit right there, another decent one. All of a sudden look at the Zergling count. These Zerglings can just run wild. And you'll notice that he's being smart with his Baneling and just saving it, not detonating it on just a couple of Zerglings. And the base has to be cancelled here for the blue player. Oh no, it just gets killed, never mind. So, well, I guess I should amend myself once again. It doesn't get killed right away, but even still, the advantage is definitely in the red player right now because he got such great trade with those Zerglings fights. And now the Mutas are out. So the Mutas, their first job should be go around, clear out all the Overlords that are on the map for blue, just to make him have to reproduce those. Secondly, you need to use these to prevent yourself from dying to a roach counter, because if you waste all your Zerglings, and by the way, this base is eventually going to go down because it's just not covered well enough. But the second job is to try and prevent dying from a roach all-in, because if you lose all of your Zerglings, kind of like we saw that last time and there's still a ton of roaches on the field, you need to use your Mutas across the map and try to reduce these roach numbers before they get to their base, before they get to your base, so that all of your advantages weren't in vain. Once again, blue player kind of pushes it away just a little bit. The Mutas need to be a little more proactive about killing Overlords, and now they're starting to target them down much better. And you can see the roaches really want to get across the map because there's not much you can do. So let's say you're the roach player in this same situation. You either have to walk over to the red player's base, try to do as much damage as you can with your roaches, or you have to keep these roaches protected underneath spore crawlers. Spore crawlers are insanely good against Mutas. You can see 45 damage per shot against a Muta, and I think that's 3 hits will kill a Muta. Yeah, I'm pretty sure my math is on there. Yeah, that sounds right. But so the roaches are going to come across the map. The Muta player are really playing this out perfectly, just going to say, Alright, well you can attack me, but by the time you get to my base, you're going to have like 5 or 6 less roaches. So if you really want to do this, you keep coming across the map. I'll be happy to do that. And the blue player, unfortunately, really not committing one way or the other. He's like, I took all this damage, and I have to go back, and that's just not a good idea. You need to commit heavily one way or the other, else you're not going to do anything. So all of a sudden, the muta transition has happened. There are mutas on the field that the blue player can't exactly deal with too well right now. The good thing is that he does have enough spores to kind of mitigate the damage, so that he's not taking major losses to the mutas, but still, the mutas have total map control. The red player is completely free to drone behind this. Look at the drone counts right now. Enormously in favor of red because he's totally safe from attacks while these mutas are out. Since, as we saw, if the roaches try to go across the map, the mutas can just pick them off one by one, and he'll probably have enough zerglings and stuff across the map to deal with them once they get there. So, huge drone advantage, and this is one way to get that in this stage of the game if you're the muta player. So this video is running really long. Wow. Okay, so there's a lot of zerglings congregating down here. Again, the hatchery is very weak, and if you can ever get the roaches kind of out on the map, I think that's what he's waiting for, is that if the roaches ever decide, alright, forget it, I'm just going to eat the muta damage, and I'm going to go and try to trade the best I can, the zerglings will just walk in here and they will kill the hatchery. So something else you need to keep in mind is ways you can counter your opponent because they're not on the correct spot on the map all the time. So muta's still being irritating here, trying to pick off as many roaches as they can, and the roaches I think actually just killed a drone or something. But you need to start thinking, if you're the muta player, what am I going to do after this? Obviously you can't stay on muta forever because you'll start to lose straight up fights and you can't attack into spores and stuff like that. And of course, once again, I'm getting phone messages, which seems to happen every single time I start to make a video. So yeah, so muta's still trying to be irritating over here, killing whatever they can. This is what you want to do with your mutas, is at least keep them active. But in the meantime, you need to start a transition of your own, and this is going to start to boil down back into roach versus roach. And again, this base is still not killed. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong game here, because I thought for sure that hatchery went down. But either way, the damage was done. He got great zergling trades. He made his muta transition happen. Now look at this enormously scary army that's coming out from the red player. And this was entirely due to having the harvester advantage basically the entire game. 50 supply lead. He can do basically whatever he wants and win the game from here. So, that's pretty much all that I have to say about ZvZ right now. Obviously, we didn't get into the more weird situations, such as things like Hive Zerg, like Brood versus Brood or Ultralisk or anything like that, just because that almost never happens. So I hope you guys at least learned something from this video. ZvZ can be really tricky, and ultimately, the best way you're going to get better at ZvZ is just to go and play games. I would suggest playing games against players that are better than you, considering they will have better mechanics and stuff. Then you can ask them and you can watch the replays and see where you can improve. But that'll pretty much do it for this. Make sure you guys check out our sponsor, which is sc2replaystats.com. They have a lot of really cool replay analysis stuff on that site. They're even putting in a section that'll help you get better at the game and kind of point out the things that you could do better in your own games. So that might be pretty helpful, but stay tuned for the next set of videos after this. I'm not quite sure what it's going to be yet. But thanks for watching, and take care.